But if I can push back, in terms, again, my understanding is that for a country like India, even if you produce, I think the storage question, I think my ultimate point was going to be that
Yeah.
the storage question has not been figured out in terms of solar. My understanding is that even if, I think in India, at one point in the afternoon, I think we produce so much electricity that it essentially becomes free, if I'm not wrong. But at, let's say, at 7 p.m., 8 p.m., where there is not enough sunlight, unless we
Yes.
solve that storage question, it becomes very difficult to. So do you think that even today, we still have to kind of make that trade-off, and we're not effectively there yet, technologically speaking, or even logistically speaking, like we haven't had that build out in terms of renewables, etc.
Yeah.
So how do you
Yeah,
think
I'll
about that?
say, yeah. So, couple of points. One is, I personally have not done a lot of work thinking about energy planning in India. So, I have to say, for a more general point of view, I'll say how it works, and I'll explain why I think the case of India can be uh, both. There are positives and negatives about thinking about it as renewables. Okay, so in general, all sources of power have their variability. Okay, a nuclear plant has to be shut down during certain parts of the year because they have to be refueled, or some equipment might have to be replaced, and so on and so forth. Coal plants, any plant, basically, there's always going to be some period of time when they have to be shut down, right? So the way that we are getting reliable electricity, to the extent that there is reliability. So here in Vancouver, if I switch on the switch, then typically the light comes on. Okay, so that's what I mean by reliability, right? And I mean, in India, there are times when it doesn't happen, and I've lived there. I know how it is in Bangalore. The newspaper will carry announcements about when there is going to be a shutdown in Rajaji Nagar or wherever you're living, and you plan your activities around that. Okay, I mean, but anyway, the reliability basically means that you should be able to. And the way that the grid tries to be reliable is to have two or three different things. It's basically to have a large number of plants, so that when one is down, others will come on. Okay, so in the case of renewables, the point is very valid. If you're going to have only solar panels, then what happens after 6 p.m. in the evening, or when the sun goes down? That's a perfectly logical question. So the first answer is, you don't ever build a grid based only on one technology, one solar panel, solar plant. You have some wind, you have some hydro, maybe some biomass, a combination of all of these things. So there's a diversity in technology, and also diversity in geography, in that, not it's not so relevant for sun, but for wind. If the wind is not blowing right now in British Columbia, where I live, maybe the wind is blowing in Manitoba, the province that's two provinces over, and the electricity from there can flow into British Columbia and vice versa, right? So there's also geographical diversity. So that's one way by which you can try to address this question of reliability. The second, and is the way that you mentioned, which is the fact that you could have storage. Okay, and these days, the storage using lithium-based batteries, have become very cheap, in part because they were used for,
Cars.
personal electronics and cars, right? So laptops and stuff like that, and then also cars, right? And so at this point, there are many parts of the world where huge amounts of storage have been installed, right? So in California, for example, I forget the exact number, but it's probably more than the nuclear capacity of India, in terms of the battery capacity in California. Okay, and this has all been a fairly recent story, but batteries are not the only form of storage. There are multiple technologies out there, and you're right that we don't have kind of a mature one technology that is one, but maybe we will never have that one technology. And that's because storage actually serves multiple roles inside a grid, right? So storage can be used to manage this kind of the problem that we started with, which is that there is no sun between, let's say, 6 p.m. and 6 a.m. in the morning, right? So there's that window that you have to think about. But it can also be used to deal with frequency fluctuations, all kinds of other sort of longer term storage, etc., etc. And each of those things might not be best served by batteries. So there are other ways by which you can store energy. And this is at this point a very widely open technology field. Huge amounts of money are going in, lots of research is happening. And I personally don't think we can be confident that by, let's say, 2030, I mean by 2040, we will know what is going to be the storage technology. We don't really know at this point. And the third bucket of solutions for the variability of solar and wind and so on is the fact that is the variability, is the possibility that you can modify the demand for electricity, right? Our demand for electricity in Bangalore or in Vancouver is not constant, right? It's going to go up during the morning, it comes back during, it comes down a little bit, it comes back up in the evening, and then in the night it goes down, and then it varies over the year whether it is summer or winter. How much AC you use or how much heating we use in the winter. All kinds of things are going to be played, right? But not all of the demand necessarily needs to be met at the moment it is generated, right? So for example, if somebody has a washing machine in their house, you can modulate when you use the washing machine, right? Do you run it during the day or do you run it during the night? And that can depend on when the electricity is plentifully available. Now, in the past, you might say, oh, I can't go back in the middle of the day from my office to go and turn on my washing machine just because solar power is this thing. But these days, much of this has become much more automatic, right? And so in the US, for example, there is this whole growth of what are called virtual power plants, which are basically companies that come to consumers and they say, hey, let's have we're going to offer you a contract by which we pay you a certain amount of money every month, and you allow us to modulate your demand. So for example, you will allow us to change your refrigerator setting. I lower the temperature, I mean, I increase the temperature by a few degrees when I want to lower the demand. Your food is not going to go bad because after half an hour, I will set it back to the same thing. But during that half an hour period, I have a momentary decrease in your demand, right? Now, individual consumers' demand doesn't matter much, but if you can aggregate tens of thousands of consumers, that can be quite a sizable amount of demand. And then these companies go to the utility company that sells the electricity, and they say, "Hey, we can offer you this flexibility in demand, and you pay us a certain amount of money. I keep half of the money, and some part of the money goes to the consumer." Okay, so these are called virtual power plants, and that's also a growth industry. There are many estimates about how. So there are a bunch of ways by which you can manage the variability of renewables. Okay, what renewables have in their favor is not just that the overall cost is low, but once you install, the what's called the marginal cost, the extra cost of producing one extra kilowatt hour is essentially zero, right? Because once you have your solar panel, you don't have to spend any money. Whereas if you have a coal plant, you have a nuclear plant, you need to buy the coal or the uranium, you have to pay the workers, and so additional electricity will always cost you a certain amount. Okay, so once the utility company has a certain capacity for renewables, they would like to use it as much as possible, right? That's the economic logic there, right? And so anyway, coming to India, there are both a plus and a minus here. So in countries like the US and Canada and so on, as renewables have become cheaper, when the renewable energy installation becomes very large, what then happens is sometimes there is so much power being generated by these renewables that all of the other plants have to be shut down, okay, because you can't use all the electricity, right? And because renewables are producing zero marginal cost power, there's an incentive to use it, so then you have to shut down your nuclear plant or a coal plant. In some cases that's not practically feasible, because in the case of a nuclear plant, when you shut it down, to restart it you have to go through a lengthy process, there are some safety challenges. And so what then the nuclear plant owners do is to say, we don't want to shut this down, instead how about we give you some money and you shut down your solar plant or you disconnect it from the grid. Okay, and in countries like Germany and so on, there are times of the day and the year when the electricity prices actually become negative because somebody is willing to pay money to another power plant, typically a renewable energy power plant, to shut down their production because there is too much of the demand is already being met with whatever is. So that's an example of when this situation with renewables is really changing very fast, right? That they are producing so much power. In India, that is never going to be a problem at this point because our energy, we are not meeting all of the electricity demand for the most, I mean, not entirely, but there is always much more power that could be consumed. If it was cheap enough, more people will use more, right? So we are at a place where, I mean, India is at a place where it can grow much faster, and this growth can come without having this challenge of having to shut down existing plants, right? Which is the challenge in the West. So that is one thing. On the flip side, a lot of the time when there are blackouts and brownouts in India, it is not happening because of the necessarily because of a shortage of electricity, but because, let's say, some transformer blows up, and because that has not been replaced, or there is some place where people are there's some problem with the wires and the wires have not been replaced, so there's a lot of other maintenance costs, which that's a different problem in a way. It doesn't have to do whether it's renewables or not. Anyway,
um
yeah, all that is a long way of explaining that I think the idea of renewables are inherently challenged by the unavailability of storage is a story that I would question.